What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over changing our first person perspective from the way we had it, the template, to a custom method. So initially, like at the end of this episode, it's going to look a little bit worse than what we were working with. But don't be fooled, we're making this change because it's going to make our lives a lot easier. It's going to make animations that we play on our weapons a lot better looking, and so it's pretty much a necessary change. I wanted to cover this sooner rather than later, especially since we're going to get into weapon animations and also animations that appear on the character and the animations that we see, since they can sometimes be different depending on if we want these animations replicated or if we want them to only show for one character or for, either server/client, because maybe we don't want the owner to see this animation because we want their view to constantly look like this, where they have the gun in front of them. Different things like that. And doing this new method will change that. Now, there's a few things we need to adjust in the next episode where if we look up, our gun also looks up. And I've also disabled a few features, such as shooting, because right now the animation isn't ready and it looks kind of silly when you try and do it. However, the rest of the logic in here, we're keeping all the same logic that we've already made in the previous episodes, so don't think we're uprooting everything. But we do have to make a change, and we're actually going to make our own custom character here as opposed to using Unreal's character, which is very important because, I don't have animations for the arms, and also it didn't have a mesh, so we'd have to put on our own mesh like I did, and then it's just a big deal. So what we're going to do is take everything we've done up to this point and basically make it work in this new method. So far for today, and in this episode, we are going to make it work so that the blaster fits in the character's hands, and you can perform animations even if the animations don't look good. You should see that the hand and the hands line up with where they should, which is good. We have the ability to change this as much as we want, so this means that we were doing a good job when we see that. And the other functionality should still work. Like, I'm still sprinting, I can still jump, I can still technically pick up weapons, although I don't have the ability to switch them right now because I have not set any of those weapons up. So we're just gonna start covering it, and I think it'll make more sense why we're doing it as we go along. Now, to get started, let's go into our character. Specifically, our BaseCharacterBP. Now, I had added this character in the last episode. Let me open up the other character, which this is the character that we all have by default in the FPS template. Now, I did remove some things, and you'll see why in a second. But normally this would just be arms. And I had all this logic in here about switching weapons and all. And then we said, okay, no, maybe we want to have an actual character. We want to have an actual mesh so that if other people look at us, or say we look in some sort of reflective material, we want to be able to see ourselves. Maybe we want to be able to see more than just arms. So we made this BaseCharacterBP. So for the record, you can go ahead and just close out the first person character entirely. If you'd like, you can disconnect a few things first. Like, since we're changing our logic here, we are going to be removing some of the inherited components. So to stop you from getting errors down the line, you can just disconnect your switch weapon mesh function for now in the first person character. This is the one with just the mannequin arms. And all these references will be invalid after today's episode. We're going to create them from scratch in the next episode, as opposed to using the Unreal ones that they've made. So if you want to just disconnect this for now, it'll stop you from getting errors in this class. Alright, now, and more importantly, onto the actual episode content. So, we made this new character last time, this BaseCharacterBP, but we had him far out. We still had our arms here, and we had the character, out here, just so we could see that the character was working with the character class. So if we were moving, the character was moving, and he was performing the proper animations. With that said, we want him to be able to use the actual weapons and, work with the animations we've got in our collider. Now, it's very possible we are going to actually use just arms on our HUD, basically display what the owner of this character sees is just the arms. So it's very possible that we won't be using the whole mesh in the end. However, regardless if we are or not, we have to start with this. Here we go. We can basically change this character, keep all the functionality inside. This is all the same stuff. I have disconnected the switch weapon mesh again in the base character BP because I want to avoid errors from the mesh 1P, mesh 1 player, and the FP gun. Now we are going to make these, and we'll probably even make them in the same spot they were before, but I had to remove them to create our own, and I'll show you why. The only thing I've added is this last part, and we'll cover this in a minute. But you can see this is the same class. All I've done is I've moved the character into the collider, and I've added something called a first-person camera, which is just a camera component. But I did want to separate, so just get the camera, and I made it a child of the mesh, because if you make a camera a child of the mesh or anything, you can get a parent socket and attach it there. So you just do the little magnifying glass, and I chose the head of the character. You can choose the eyes and different things. You can do, you can change this as much as you want. Different things like this. So you can change it to your liking so that it's where you want. And we'll change the weapon position down the line as well. You'll see it doesn't have to be so close to the camera, and you don't have to see all your character's body when you're looking down. There's ways around that. The important part is that we can actually have full control over this now, as opposed to just having it where the character says that it is. We want it to be reliant on animation, so if we're doing reload animations, we can bring the gun up in the air, pull out the magazine, whatever it is that we're doing. Alright, so yeah, basically just on the camera, choose parent socket, and I chose head, but you can choose whatever bone you want on the skeleton. Then in the camera options, I also use pawn control rotation. You technically don't have to do this. If you don't do this, it will use just whatever the character's head is doing exactly. So this is good for more of a cinematic sense, and you can toggle it on and off. So basically, at this point, I can't look up or down. I can only look the way the pawn is looking. But since the idle animation has a little bit of movement, then the camera actually has a little bit of movement. So it can look cool in a horror sense or if you're dazed or stunned, but normally you're not going to want that, so you can just use the pawn to control the rotation. Alright, now the other notable thing here, before we get into what we added, is that I've removed a lot of the inherited components. Now you can't just right click and delete, or click on it and delete it. For inherited components, they come from code or they come from some parent class. Since this is the base character BP, it comes from the FPS tutorial character, which is our code class. And then the code class had a bunch of stuff in it. Now I've commented it out for now so you can see what it is. You can feel free to leave it in if you want. It's not necessarily hurting anything, just make them invisible right now. I just wanted to comment them out so they weren't there, so it wasn't clogging up all the assets, like everything in the, it wasn't clogging up the components, excuse me. That way there weren't a ton here that we weren't using, because there's ones for VR, there's one for the gun, the first person mesh, all this different stuff. So I wanted to clean this up a little bit. And this is around the time where, I should say, if you have not watched the other episodes of this tutorial series, you may want to catch up. There's a lot that we've done. We're on episode 17, 18. We've done a good amount, and we're going to finally start getting into, actually applying the animations on our weapon and being able to choose how our character looks from the first person perspective, which we can't do without this change. This is why this one is so important. So I'm very excited about the future of this series. If you want to catch up, I'll leave a link to the playlist right here, and it'll help you understand a little bit more about why we're doing what we're doing. And if not, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to watch it to understand this. This is all stuff that comes in the first-person shooter template. So when you make an FPS template, this is what comes with it. But let me help you understand what's going on here. So all the inherited components, actually, I basically commented them all out. In fact, I did comment them all out, not basically. So I commented out the mesh gun muzzle location, VR gun, VR muzzle location, the camera component, and the right and left motion controllers. Now, there's a few things here as to why I did a lot of this. So, could we still use the mesh, the gun, the muzzle location, the camera? Yes, we could definitely still use all those if we want to, and it won't really cause issues, but there's a few problems with inherited components, and it's that you can't delete them, you can only, hide them. And also, for example, with the camera, you can't reparent a camera, you can't change where it's at. So it's its own component. To do the socket thing, I need to make it a child of the component I'm trying to attach to, which in this case is the mesh. There is a way to do it in code, so we could definitely do it in code, but in my opinion it's just easier to do it this way, especially since the socket method is right here, and you can just literally click it and look for the list of sockets. But it's completely viable to do in code, so if you know what you're doing, feel free to do that, but we do need the first-person camera as a child of the mesh to be able to make some important changes down the line, especially in the next episode. So I've commented out anything that was here in the header file for the components list. So all these things that you see here. You can do a block comment if you want, which is basically slash asterisk and then asterisk slash, like that. I happen to comment out every single line because I did it as I went to make sure there were no issues, and that's why I have it single line comment all the lines down. Obviously not necessary that you do that. Alright, and then you don't have to change anything with any of the code we've actually written, but I do scroll down and I also comment out these two things at the very bottom. The two functions that are inline, so the get mesh 1p and get first person camera component, because they will fail now since we've commented out their components. These I would not delete, I would leave them commented out. I mean, we can write them again easily, but we will most likely add this one back in. I am probably going to add a camera to the code, and you'll see why again in the next episode. So just for convenience sake, you can leave it in and just leave it commented like I have, or you can delete it, it's up to you. And then, of course, that makes changes in the CPP file. So in the constructor, I've also commented out everything as opposed to deleting it. I've commented out the camera component, the mesh, the gun, the muzzle location, the offset, the motion controllers for VR, the VR gun, and the VR muzzle location. Again, all of this can be deleted if you like. We can also just transfer over the logic that we just made in Unreal and keep it in code if you want to keep it in code. It's actually not even very hard. You can see how they do it. Like, remember we set the use pawn control rotation on the camera? They do it right here, and it's very easy to do. So it's not a big deal. Regardless, I just had to show you one way or another to do it, and I chose the blueprints because, quite frankly, it was easier. Alright, and then in begin play, there is also a method all about VR. Now this you can completely get rid of if you're not making a VR game. This is something that, sure, we're talking about now, but you could absolutely get rid of it. Alright, and then two other places. On fire, this is going to stop us from firing, but that's okay. We're going to make our own location in the next episode to fire from, and then we'll be able to shoot from that spot. So we're getting rid of the muzzle location so it doesn't know where to spawn the object, and since it does that, we can't spawn the object anywhere, or otherwise it will get an error, and we won't, we can't spawn the object like this. But we still want to get rid of this location. I'll show you how to make a custom one. But for now, on fire, you can get rid of all the logic if we're using motion controllers, or even delete the whole branch. Again, if you're not using motion controllers or VR. But what we need from the else here is to get rid of the spawn location that requires the muzzle location. And then we can't spawn the actor anymore without the muzzle location because the spawn location was never created. Right here. These can be left commented out. I would not get rid of these because we will be using these again. once we actually set our own muzzle location. Then at the very bottom of the on-fire function, I've also commented out this logic about the, playing the animation that is specified. This could be very useful. This is one of the first instances where we've seen animations being played in code throughout all the series that I've done and that I've been working on. So feel free to take a peek at this and see how you can do animation logic in code. It is very interesting. But we want to ignore it for now because we no longer have mesh 1p. This was already commented out by the template, not something I did. Same with this. And the other things that we comment out, zoom in and stop zoom. Now before, in episode 1 or episode 2 I believe it was, I was doing zoom in just by getting the first person camera and setting the field of view to a different value. Now this is good at a base level, and some games actually keep it that way. There's a lot of games where you zoom in and it just makes you closer. Now if you're going for that, then you can actually still do this. What you'd want to do is make the camera component, link it to the one you have in Blueprint, and then still just set the field of view when they zoom in, zoom out. And you can do it in Blueprint if you're more comfortable. Just call a Blueprint implementable event that does this. So if you don't want to actually aim down sights and you want it to be you just zoom in with the gun, you're more than welcome to just do this method still. This is still good. But in the next episode, with the changes we make, we're going to be able to actually aim down sights, and you'll be able to see. I don't want to say see through the scope because we can't actually see through like the Unreal weapon the way it's set up, but I'll show you how you can configure where you want it to be. So we can put it right in the center of the screen, and if you have a gun with iron sights or like a sight on it, you'll be able to see through the sight. And that's why I've commented this out. We got rid of the first person camera, but we also want to just get rid of that for now. That way we do a real zoom, a more realistic zoom, we'll say. Now the rest of the logic is fine. This is all stuff that we've added. This is commented out because this was just a method choice. And at this point you're good. So I know that was a lot of commenting out, but I kept track of all of it so I'll know what to enable for next time. But, build, solution, or if you're launching through Visual Studio, launch through here. If you're not, make sure you compile when you get back into Unreal. And it'll get rid of all that garbage that we don't need anymore. Then when you get back into your BaseCharacterBP, all the ugly inherited components we don't need will be gone, which is good. And at that point, now we have our character here, we have our camera here, and we have to figure out how we can attach our gun and make it look nice. So if we go into, we can actually do it from the first person character, but I'm going to go into the anim BP for our character. Now this is something we also talked about before. Can't remember if I actually covered the blend space in this video in particular, but I do have an episode on blend spaces if you want to check it out for what I was doing with the walk speed. I disabled it for now because I didn't want it moving while we were in the idle. I'll show you a better way to use it with our new system where you can continue to use blend spaces but also place certain animations on it after we get our aim down sights working, because we don't want to do it before then. So I just have my state machine go into my output pose. And in this, again, I've already set this up. I set this up in the episode where we were making, we were adding animations to our mesh. So if you want to see that, I'll leave the icon in the top right corner right here. The only change I've had since then is I changed the idle animation. This was the previous idle animation, and it's fine. You can definitely still use it if you want. I changed it because I wanted to be aiming down sights so you can see the guns at all time. If you want to be able to put your gun away, or you need to for whatever reason, then go ahead and use one where you can't see it. But for now, since we're kind of going over how to actually put the gun in the right spot and everything, it would be good if I could see it. So I've changed the idle animation to have the gun here at all times. Now, let's look at how we got the gun here. This is very important. So we've dealt with the preview meshes before, and I somewhat went over them. But we can get a lot more advanced now that we have our own mesh and we know exactly where we're trying to put the gun and different things like that. Remember, now that we got rid of some of the inherited components, we have we basically have free reign over this character. We can do whatever we want and, see the results. So, in our skeleton view, so the skeleton of our character, you find the bone that you want to use to attach the gun to. We've done this before. So I did it, I believe, for right hand index 2. Here we go. Yep. And now it doesn't matter where you do it, just whatever looks good. And what you can do is you can right click and add socket. And then you can right click on the socket that is created and rename it to be whatever you want. I call mine weapon socket, as I did last time. Now I had removed it because we were changing characters and I didn't want it on just the character. I wanted it on our hands that the first person saw. But we couldn't, we couldn't do them both before. So now we can. So we have weapon socket here. And when you click on a socket, you can add preview asset. And so you're going to add the gun that you want to use. For now, I just use the blaster, which I believe is called, I think it's just called gun, yes. SK skeleton FP gun. That's for the skeletal mesh. So add that, and then it'll spawn in on this socket. Now, it won't really be in the best spot, but it's hard to tell from this T-pose. What you can do is, in the details panel over here, it'll usually be empty at this point. You can click on something called preview scene settings, and then you can go to the mesh, make sure the mesh is the mesh that you want to use for that character. If you have one skeleton, like the mixed mode skeleton for multiple characters, you might want to change the preview mesh just to make sure that there's no clipping on certain parts of the body for that character and different things like that. And there's more stuff about additional skeletons right here. Alright. Now, up at the top here, once you've set all your settings, you have this thing called animation, and it says preview controller. And what you can do is basically assign an animation that you want to test this on, because it's kind of hard to see like this. Like, you can look at it, but that doesn't, I mean, it looks good where it's at, but I can't really tell, right? So I can go to use specific animation, and I can play an animation that I want to test it with. The idle is usually a good one. And you're going to move this into place, because it's not going to be perfect when you do it. So you get as perfect as you can, as nice as you can. The way you do that is you click on the weapon socket, and you literally just move it. You can move it as much as you want, or as little as you want. Okay? That's where I found it to be good. You can also rotate it. Not that that's what you want in that case, but you see what I mean? You can rotate it, you can scale it. Maybe not his arm, but you see what I'm saying? You can rotate it, scale it, and move it. So get it into position where you want it. I specifically made sure, there's a little bit of clipping, but I made sure that his fingers were going through the holes here for the trigger and all. And also that his hand was pretty much where it should be. It should be like right here. So if we really wanted to, just to show you another example, since his hand isn't perfectly on it, we could scale it down just a little bit. That's a little bit too much. Try not to scale it down that much. But you could scale it down, just like that. You just have to be careful from the arms and stuff that it still looks good, which it's a little funky right now, because it's a little bit too big, but his hand is at a more appropriate spot, and maybe it'll look better. We can try it. And it looks a little bit squished, so probably not, but you see my point. You can actually change the things right on the spot here, just by changing how it's attached to the character. So make sure you get it where you want it. Now that we're playing an animation on it, and now that we actually have our mesh to show, we want to make this where it's pretty good. Now, it's not going to look great. As you saw with my example, I can see part of my character's body. The gun's kind of at an angle, which is okay. That can easily be adjusted. But there's things we're going to have to change. But basically, you just want to make it where you can see the majority of your gun, and the actual size of it is pretty good. The rest we can cover in the next episode. Okay, and then once you have the preview mesh down, you're good. all we have to do is, you know, access this socket like we were doing before and attach, but now we're going to attach in a different spot because we don't want to just attach when we have the gun. We want to attach, in this case we're going to attach when we begin play, but we could attach whenever we change a gun or whenever we do, you know, whatever logic, pick up our first gun, whatever. So, if we go into our base character BP now, you can see I can't see the gun on the character because he's not really attached to this character, right? He's attached to the actual mesh for preview. We have to still add it. You could technically do it during construction scripts, but you would need either the component in the component list already or some way to get a reference to it. We don't really need that because, you know, that's great for testing purposes to have in the construction script, but again, if you don't want to have a weapon, then it can complicate things. Just adding it in begin play is more than enough. There's two ways you can do it. You can either use, basically we're going to spawn the space weapon BP and just attach it. You can either get actor transform and force everything to be snap to target, or you can make transform and keep relative. It's up to you. So you can either do this with snap to target and play like that, or you can do make transform 0 and keep relative. It's up to you. The transform at this location will work because it's going to keep relative to where character's spawning. It's not a big deal. I wanted to show you that because some people have asked me about the snap to target and they still don't really understand it. Basically, snap to target will put it wherever you have this transform here, right? We have the transform that we're spawning the actor is at the, I'm doing get actor transform of the base character BP. So it's going to spawn us over the character and we're going to attach it to the socket. So the location, rotation, and scale of the weapon that we're spawning should be snapped to the target where we're putting it. The target here is the weapon. So the weapon's going to attach to this socket and it'll just stay there, again, with the location, rotation, and scale. So what we saw in the preview will be pretty darn accurate for this. In fact, it should be right on. And there you go. So now you can actually attach your weapon, and it looks pretty good. Like, it's definitely not perfect, but we're not done with this yet. So this looks pretty good, and we'll be able to adjust this more in the next episode. But now we have full control over what our character actually looks like. So in the next episode, when we get into this, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so our character can shoot again and do all his basic functions again, like switch weapons. We'll make sure that all the weapons actually fit within the hands and look good. Because that was another issue we were having, is that with the arms we had, we couldn't really change the camera or the attach point. We were all putting in the same attach point. So now we'll make sure each weapon looks good the way we want it to be held by the character. And then we'll fix some of the issues where, like, you know, we probably don't want to see the chest of our character. So maybe you do. But it does need to be a little bit backed off. It's a little intrusive right now. And we're actually kind of clipping through it. If you are having clipping issues with your weapon, you know, not so much the character, but the weapon in particular, where you're not seeing all of it, you can change the near clip plane. There's a few ways to actually do this. The easiest way, and the way I've seen online the most, is to go into your project settings, your general settings, and then just change the near clip plane. Most people recommend 1. You can do it. I've seen 3 is like a good number. Doesn't really matter. This is just how much distance before it starts clipping things from the camera's near plane. And basically, things that are too close to the camera get clipped. So you can't see them, or you can see through them, basically. So you lower this, and you can't see through your gun anymore. I think it starts as 10 by default. And there you go, guys. That's pretty much it. But I'm very satisfied with this, because this right here means that we can actually do quite a few things with this. First of all, with this, we can now get rid of these floating weapons after we pick them up. I know we're not doing it in this episode, but something that was bothering me is we were able to pick up these weapons, but they had to stay there because we needed the reference to them, and that's just a terrible method. But now that we actually can attach this to the point, we can pick it up, and we can either drop, the weapon we had that we spawned on the ground, or we can pick up this other weapon and just add it to our inventory. So basically they can be either put on our back if we actually want to display it, or made it visible and invisible when we want them to. But now we can add the actual references to the guns, and they don't have to be floating there after, which will make our game a lot cleaner. Plus our animations will be better, and we can also look up and down, and you'll be able to see your weapon and all moving with it, with the new logic that we set up. So this is a very good change. I know it's a little bit annoying to switch things halfway through, so I apologize for not doing this earlier, but I did a lot of research on first-person shooter games and kind of the best method to implement a lot of things, and I figured we'll hop into it sooner rather than later. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed and this helped you, please subscribe. That's more for the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I'm going to give a huge shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube subscribers. Thank you guys so much for giving me extra support to keep this channel going. I really, really appreciate it, and it always gives me more encouragement and more support to continue working on these. If you guys want to check out some programming live streams, we stream every Friday, unless I'm on vacation, for a side-scroller game that I'm currently working on, inspired by Castlevania. And I'll answer any programming-related questions, or just, any questions in general that you have that you want to talk about. And it'll be right here on this channel at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's something you're interested in. Watch out for that.
Actually, we don't have to do this in the...
Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.